Hello. Students of the MA English program who have had a look at the British poetry course would remember that they have to attempt 3 term papers during the year and take a final examination. Last time I told you that the best point to start reading the course, that is the British poetry course, is the one page in block 1 which is called Welcome to this course on British poetry. This one page will answer many of your questions. In fact, most of your questions that you might have in mind, that you might be looking for an answer from a counselor, a friend, or the faculty here at IGNOU. Try and read it. At the first reading, you may miss many of the points because those questions haven't occurred to you. Whenever there is a question that you want somebody else to answer for you, read that one page called Welcome to this course on British poetry. Next, I had talked about the term papers or sessional essays as they are called. I don't, or no teacher gives out all the secrets to one's students, but I am going to give you one. I would advise to read the last unit of the course, that is unit 52 in block 10, soon after reading that introductory page in block 1. Most students have actually done that because they want to score high marks and they want to do well, and they also want to understand how their papers would be examined, why they should write sessional essays on which no questions would be asked at the final examination. You are asked to write about 3,000 words on an age or a period of British poetry. Then you are asked to write about one particular poet. And finally, you are asked to write about one particular poem, and you have to write 3,000 words. We had come to this decision after a discussion in our faculty that at the MA level, students should be able to write a long essay, because that is what they would be required to do after they have done their MA and when they enter life. If they are in a literate profession, they would be expected to write a lengthy disquisition, call it, essay, call it, a report, call it, on a specific subject. So, these essays would help you as a generalist to organize your material at length. If you want to go on with your study of literature, English literature in particular, then these 3 essays will help you understand the methodology of study of any literary subject, especially poetry. Because when you are writing a 3,000 word essay, then you go into the various details of the subject, and that is what is very important. Next, you would like to know why, if you are prepared to write, you have been prepared to write 3 essays during the year, why should you be asked to write reference to context questions, that is 10 reference to context questions at the final examination? The reason is very simple. We do not want you to memorize answers. Generally, it has been seen that students memorize a few pet questions which come again and again at the interval of 1 or 2 years, and that defeats the purpose of studying the text. You are asked to, and you are expected to read poetry, British poetry. We want to show you the progress, the development over the years in British poetry. That is not just for the sake of British poetry, it is for the sake of training your mind. If you can see things in a historical perspective, you will be able to develop as a human being. Because you remember, English is part of humanities, the human sciences. That is how the Germans call humanities, the human sciences. You have the natural sciences, you have the social sciences. And a study of poetry in a historical perspective unfolds before you a kind of development. You might ask me, is Chaucer a worse poet than Milton? Is Milton an inferior poet compared to Ezra Pound or W.B. Yeats or T.S. Eliot? No, that's not the point. The point is that even in their greatness, you see a development. Just think of the film songs that you might have heard, were the songs of Sehgal not as good as, for instance, the songs of Sonu Nigam? No, that's not true. Nobody would agree with that. But Sehgal's songs bear the mark of his time, just as Sonu Nigam's songs bear the mark of the present era. Your children, when they hear the songs of Sonu Nigam 25 years from now, they would feel, oh, he is outdated. That is what art does. It records in a very subtle manner the movement, the fluctuations, the aspirations, the fears, the desires, the longings of every age. And these change in a very subtle fashion. We don't take notice of the minor or inferior poets, but these great poets, even while they are great, they are products of their time, and that is what we want you to discover with the help of poetry. In China, the civil servants were tested on poetry. The civil servants who came to India from England were products of Oxford and Cambridge, who had studied the moral tripos or the classics, After reading Homer and Virgil, they came to rule over India, and some of them made good civil servants. By reading British poetry, we hope you should be able to become good, responsible citizens. Not just good, responsible citizens, but enlightened people, because your mind would get cultivated. So that is about these sessional essays. Well, some people copy them from the textbook. Some people copy them from bazaar notes. We are not very much worried about them, because they themselves have, in a way, opted out of the race. The good students would not do that. The students who would secure a first class would not do that. And while a university teaches many students, it finds its redemption in those few who do very well. Don't we remember only the greats? It is up to you to decide whether you are going to be on the margins or you would be among those who would go forward. Next, the question about the term and examination. There is a model term paper, term and examination question paper in Unit 52. You would find that there are a couple of passages from each block. Each block stands for an age, a period of British poetry. An age represents a dominant style of writing, a pattern of thinking, a consciousness of experiences. Now your examiners would like to know how well you have understood this whole range of British poetry, and that in the length of no more than 3 pages. Don't write more than 3 pages about one passage. Students who have written 15, 20 pages on one passage have very often failed because they haven't written the important points. In Unit 52, you are told what the important points are and how many marks are assigned for each important point. In block 7, for instance, and 8, we have explained certain passages for you. So they can act as model reference to context question answers, just as in Unit 36 of the course, we have written a model sessional essay for you. You must read that essay carefully, partly no doubt for the content, because it seeks to introduce you to the Victorian age, but that section is supposed to tell you about how to present your term paper. A term paper has a definite style of presentation. A sessional essay has a definite style of presentation, and follow that style closely. If you do that, you would score high marks. I had also tried to answer a question regarding critical questions. We are aware that students are often asked critical questions if they decide to sit for, say, competitive examinations. competitive examinations are meant to select students for very attractive positions in the government, in the bureaucracy. But they follow a system of elimination. They can vary their choice of questions, which option we don't have. We have a limited choice. However, in order to address that question, in a number of places, for instance, in block 6, the last unit in block 6, the first unit in block 7, and unit 51 in block 10 are all about critical questions. You should pay attention to them also. It is not difficult. If you have read the text properly, you should be able to answer critical questions conveniently, and as students have actually done that. So, to repeat once again, start reading the first page, that is welcome to this course on British poetry. Then go to unit 52. Find out what your examiners will finally expect from you, what you have to do during the course of the year. Thereafter, think about the term, about your sessional essays and the term and examination questions. When you bear that in mind, then come over to unit 1 and then to unit 2. Unit 1 is about 2 pictures on your course. Every block, you must have noticed, has this cover page, and there is a picture on this cover page. What is this? What does this stand for? Many people have told me that she is Saraswati. Some told me she is Lakshmi. One student from Darbhanga told me that she must be Minerva, because it's a course on British poetry. So, there is no reason why Saraswati and Lakshmi should be there. She must be Minerva. That was not the plan of work that we had. She is neither Saraswati nor Lakshmi nor Minerva. She is a copy of a Mughal painting, a present day copy of a Mughal painting. In that first unit, you would find there is picture, another picture from the Mughal album of Dara Shikoh. Why did I use that picture there? The reason was that I wanted to compare and contrast. Look at this picture. Here is a typical Mughal woman. What is so specific about her? You can see the body line of this lady. This is a picture from the album of Dara Shikoh, as your book itself will tell you. It shows the body line of the lady. In Indian art, we always valued the body line. You would realize that there is an erotic suggestion in it. And while we had a very puritanical outlook on life, in day-to-day life, we relegated the erotic aspect of our life into art. That is a typical feature of Indian art. Westerners who see our films often point out why the men and women so immodestly behave in our films. That has always been, throughout history, a typical feature of Indian life and art. What we don't want to see in the family, in our social gatherings, we relegate to art. And in a way, that is a true picture of how we think and feel within ourselves. So the lady on your cover page is not a truly Indian woman. You would feel surprised. And I had asked this question to the girl who painted this for me. In fact, she did not paint it for me. She had painted it for herself, which I took for the cover page. Our consciousness changes. This picture shows that we are not today what we were in the 17th century, much less what we were in the Vedic age. We cannot be. The history behind us has changed us. There is no point in looking with nostalgia towards the past. So many movements early in the 20th century in India took place in order to bring back our Vedic consciousness. But it did not have a lasting effect, because people in general, leave aside one or two or three or a handful who read, who think, and who live life according to their principles, the common humanity, which is almost all of us, the common humanity is influenced, almost programmed by the society, and the society is programmed by its history. And that is why we have laid so much emphasis on history. And your cover page suggests that. I have already shown you the first cover page. You may have noticed the last cover page. Here, as we have told you, is Goddo Pahan. He is a shepherd. You have seen him, seen tears trickling down his eyes, and we have compared these two persons in this course. What is poetry? What informs poetry? What makes poetry? You would say poetry is made of words. Yes, poetry is made of words. Speech is made of words. A command is made of words. A request is made of words. So poetry is not just made of words, although ideally in the first block of your course, that is on the last cover page, below the picture of Goddo Pahan, you should have had this quotation from Wallace Stevens. He says, "Poetry sometimes crowns the search for happiness. It is itself a search for happiness." In another place, yes, I was thinking about Mallarmé. Mallarmé, the French poet, said, "It is hardly with ideas It is hardly with ideas that one makes poetry. It is with words. It is hardly with ideas one makes poetry. It is with words. Why did he say that? That is something very obvious. Because the French symbolists used words and wanted to use words somewhat unconsciously, almost like a Freudian psychiatric patient who utters words because they release his or her inner feelings unconsciously. You find when you read The Wasteland, you find that these words are coming out unconsciously, demonstrating the angst, the anxiety, the malaise of the society in the early 20th century in Europe. Wasn't it the century of the first two wars? Do you remember when World War I was fought? It was between 1914 and 1918. And soon after, in 21 years, Europe saw another war between 1939 and 1945. And this was just the effect of what went on before. From the time of the French Revolution to the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte, his conquest of Europe, then you had another Bonaparte, Napoleon Bonaparte, and then you had Bismarck in Germany, and Europe was preparing itself, complicating its own society. Today we would say by acting immorally. Well, such statements are generally rash and often not very meaningful. But before we close, let me tell you about one more type of question that you can expect in the final exam, and that is a quotation about poetry may be given and you might be asked to write an essay on it. For instance, there could be, poetry is more philosophical and of higher value than history. This is a quotation which is supposed to be at the end of block 1. I find that the new reprints of block 1 don't have that quotation. That it appears that something has gone wrong somewhere. Make sure that you used, you know at least what the correct quotations were meant to be where. If you have a look at the old volumes, I find that in one of the old volumes of block 3, they have put this quotation. Poetry is more philosophical and of higher value than history. Poetry is more philosophical and of higher value than history. Throughout today, I have been talking to you about the importance of history. Why history is so important in the study of poetry, in the study of human sciences for that matter, economics, political science, history of science. And then here comes Aristotle. Is he right or is he wrong? How do I and how should you value his statement? There was Coleridge, another philosopher among poets, who also thought that poetry is more philosophical. Poetry, it has its value because of its philosophical content. What sense does it make to you? Have you thought about it? If you haven't, just think about it. You would recall that Gandhiji did not value history. In a country like ours, history creates all kinds of problems. But if we ignore it, we are likely to face more problems. So there should not be any running away from history. There should be a better understanding of history. And here is Aristotle, who says that poetry is more philosophical and of higher value than history. Aristotle was a philosopher. A philosopher tries to understand things in its greatest depth. And that is why we value philosophy. A superficial understanding of subject is not enough. History is important, but more important still is a better understanding, a philosophical look at history. Gandhiji found that people did not learn from history, or they learned, for instance, to take revenge. It does not lead us anywhere. That was why he was so skeptical about history. Poetry takes you to greater depth. If you want to understand a period of history, read its poets. They would give you an insight into the thought of that age. A poet gives you an insight into the thought of an age. That is why a poet is important. Shelley called poets the unacknowledged legislators of the world. What does a legislator do? What does your member of legislative assembly or member of parliament do? He makes laws for you, and laws regulate our society. Shelley thought, and so did Johnson. You remember, it is there in one of your textbooks. It is there in volume 7. It says, the poet must write as the interpreter of nature. The poet must write as the interpreter of nature and the legislator of mankind. Samuel Johnson, before Shelley, had thought about the poet being a legislator of mankind. A poet is a philosopher. Aristotle said that, and so did Coleridge in the 19th century. And a philosopher thinks about human values, about the society in great depth. Gandhiji did not like reading poetry. Gandhiji had very little appreciation for the arts. But Pandit Nehru called Gandhiji a great artist in life, in his own life. What is that artist who treats his own life as a poem, a beautiful poem? My friends who are musicians tell me about Bade Ghulam Ali Khan, when he used to look at the clouds. He used to point out how those clouds embodied the ragas. When he saw a few fish swimming in water, he could see one of his ragas being embodied in it. So Gandhiji was a poem, a living poem, a poet, a poem in his person. And there lies the philosophy. And that was the reason why he did not value history, to my mind at least. Because if we do not read our history properly, then we are likely to make a mess of it, a mess of our life today and a mess of the lives of our children who are to come. So, I wanted to point out that you might be asked to write, you might be given one of these quotations and you might be asked to write on those quotations. The examiner in our system, in any university system, is free to test you in the manner he or she likes to do so, and you should be prepared for it. But prepare yourself properly for the examinations, which would involve a deep reading, a proper reading. It's not very hard work, it's just a little systematic work. And if you do that, you would feel rewarded. Very briefly, once again, read that first page, Welcome to this course on British poetry, where I have told you, as a critic, as a student of literature, you have to do two things: analyze a text and compare the text with other texts you have read. This is what I have done in the first unit of the course, which you should read at the outset. Thank you very much for listening to me.